Okay, the title of our study is Familial Influence on Eating Behaviors by Isabel Kaufman, Isabella Ostuni, Brianna Plass, and Danielle Strashinsky. So first, the problem the study addresses. So restrictive eating behaviors can be defined as when someone avoids eating certain foods due to a lack of interest of food or as a result of having traumatic experience surrounding food. It can also be avoiding behaviors because of the desire to lose weight. Restrictive eating behaviors are often a precursor to the development of eating disorders, which are physically and mentally damaging to adolescents and adults. We found a statistic that 2 to 4% of adolescents and young adults develop eating disorders. So we thought this was really important because having an eating disorder can disrupt your quality of life and limit a person in what they want to do. Also, many people develop restrictive eating behaviors because of modeling behaviors and the way their parents or family treat conversations around food. So we saw a lot of evidence around the influence parents may have in the way people view food or the relationship they have with it, especially restrictive eating. A little bit of background. We found in previous research that family influence has a strong part in shaping eating behaviors. We were specifically focusing on this influence when a person was in their adolescent years and how these eating behaviors have stuck with them into their college years. So referring back to some of the previous research that we found, we draw a couple conclusions. So if one is experiencing teasing and attention is being called to a person's body size, this could lead to restrictive eating behaviors for that person. Also, if a parent has control over feeding behaviors like controlling portions, limiting snacks, this could lead to restrictive eating behaviors as well. We also found that if one's overall mealtime experience is not great, where one has a bad experience sitting down with their family for a meal, this could also lead to harmful modeling behaviors. In other words, if a parent is displaying unhealthy mealtime cues, it could be mimicked by the child, leading to restrictive eating behaviors that extend into their adult years. So social learning theory we found to support a lot of our evidence and hypotheses. The social learning theory was proposed by Albert Bandura, and it emphasizes the importance of observing, modeling, and imitating the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions of others. Social learning theory also considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. So this theory connects to our study because it supports that the influence of one's family and the role that parents play in the development extends into their early adult years. So parents could have an influence on a child's eating behavior that they take with them, and so those closest to an individual may have particularly powerful influence on the individual, making behaviors of those closest. So children trust their parents. So if they have a certain relationship with food and reflecting it to their children, they may pick up those same behaviors and not even realize it, just because they think that is what their parents do. They think that is what's right, and they follow in their footsteps, most likely. Social learning theory can also be applied to the way restrictive eating behaviors are formed, because if a young person observes their parents constantly dieting, counting calories, criticizing their own body, etc., social learning theory proposes that the child will most likely pick up on similar behaviors. One of the key studies that really stood out to us was a study that shows that there is an increase in poor self-esteem and mental health issues among college students regarding their body image. So the participants included 267 female and 156 male. They were all first-year college students. Self-esteem was consistently related to body image dissatisfaction for women. Women consistently exhibited a more negative body image than did men, And for both men and women, more positive health-related behaviors were positively related to self-esteem and body image. So we find this really important to study because young adults, especially young adults in college, under a lot of stress with their studies, and if they are concerned about body image and they have body dissatisfaction, this can take a lot away from a person's college experience, including not wanting to socialize as much, not accelerating in their schoolwork the way they would normally be able to, and just not being able to overall live a quality life throughout these years. So if body dissatisfaction and poor self-esteem can be reduced in college students in any way, it would make more happy and successful students. So now I'm going to get into this. So our first one is parent teasing. Parental teasing can be defined by verbal harassment about appearance and body weight by parents towards their children. One of the studies that supported this is that when middle school aged girls averaging at 12 years old were teased by their parents and family members about their weight and body size, they reported higher levels of restrictive eating behavior. So one of them was limiting calorie intake, and that was more than participants who did not experience teasing. Parental teasing can be extremely detrimental to a child's view of themselves, resulting in a low self-esteem and restrictive eating behaviors. So for the present study, we measured this predictor with a 15-item survey about participants' experience with parental teasing. So if the participant had a higher score on the survey, this indicated that they had a higher rate of teasing from their parents. Another predictor was the parental control over feeding. Parental control over feeding can be defined as setting limits, providing routines that promote self-regulation, as well as controlling feeding practices. So parental control over feeding often stems from the family's own eating style, we found. So if a parent restricts ice cream, they won't want their child to have ice cream as well. Researchers found in a study about young girls emerging dietary restraint, it was found that pressure in child feeding is associated with the emergence of dietary restraint and disinhibition among girls. This predictor was measured with a 27-item survey about the amount of control one's parent had over their food when the participant was between the age of 12 and 16. And if they reported a higher score, this indicated that their parent had more control over the food they ate, the food that was in the house, and overall just the control that their parents had with their relationship with food. And our last predictor is family mealtime experience. So family mealtime experience can be defined as family mealtime communication, meal communication-based stress, the mealtime structure, and appearance weight control. So if dinner time is silent, if there's comments made about portion size, or if there's comments being made about body size at dinner, that will all result on our study as like negative mealtime experience. The social learning theory can be applied to family mealtime experiences based on modeling behaviors, which imply that an individual will mimic the behaviors of their parents during meal times. For example, if a child sees their mother avoiding carbs during dinner, it is possible that the child will start avoiding carbs as well due to the modeling behaviors they see from their mother. We measured this predictor with a retrospective 35-item questionnaire about their parents' attitudes during mealtimes, with higher scores indicating negative mealtime experiences.
So along with our predictors, we also looked at moderators. We saw there was a gap in literature when looking at restrictive eating behavior studies. So there were numerous studies on restrictive eating, but they were all missing socioeconomic status and parental education level. And we thought these could act these two factors could act as potential moderators. A moderator is a factor that can influence the relationship between the predictor and the outcome. So our study is also taking socioeconomic status and parental education level into account when looking at the predictors that Danielle had previously mentioned and the outcome of restrictive eating. So our first moderator, like I said, is socioeconomic status. When examining socioeconomic status, a study by Wiggins Smith found that low-income families who use food stamps to purchase food tend to prioritize cheaper, fattier cuts of meat, like hot dogs or ground beef. And in the same study, participants reported buying potatoes, white bread, and ramen noodles instead of vegetables and other more expensive but healthier items. This can be associated with non-restrictive eating because fattier cuts of meat and starchy foods like potatoes and white bread are higher in calories. So given the prior research, we hypothesize that restrictive eating behaviors will be moderated by socioeconomic status, such that participants of lower socioeconomic status will have less restrictive eating behaviors due to the food they have access to and prioritize purchasing. Our next moderator is parental education level. In a study about food consumption among European children, it saw that lower parental education level is associated with an increased consumption of high sugar and high fat foods compared to those European children whose parents had higher education levels. And then in a different study, researchers found that participants whose parents were managers or professionals were more likely to desire a thinner body figure compared to individuals from blue-collar families. So this shows that the parents with a higher education level were more focused on a restrictive eating behavior than parents with a lower education level. So our hypothesis is that restrictive eating behaviors will be moderated by parental education level, such that individuals whose parents have a higher education level will have higher levels of restrictive eating behaviors. So our current study seeks to find a relationship between familial attitudes on eating behaviors and restrictive eating patterns. We hypothesize that the way family members view eating can lead to restrictive eating in adolescence, and that factors such as socioeconomic status and parental education level will moderate said relationship. Our hypotheses are one's mealtime experience may have the most influence over restrictive eating behaviors due to the social learning theory. Because one's mealtime experience is backed up by the social learning theory, we feel that it is most prominent. Higher reports of parental teasing will lead to more restrictive eating behaviors due to an increase in low self-esteem. And our final hypothesis is that less parental control is associated with a healthier relationship to food, which means the child is less likely to develop restrictive eating behaviors. More structure and control negatively correlated with restrictive behaviors.
Okay, so now looking at our study, so we administered an online anonymous survey to participants through Muhlenberg's SONA program via Qualtrics. So our participants consisted of 37 females, mostly predominantly white participants, and there was a good distribution of family income and parental education level across our results. Okay, so in total, we had 5 measures. So our first measure is the restrictive eating measure. This scale contains 24 items that ask participants to report on all episodes of eating within the past 24 hours. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and to indicate whether the episode was a snack or a meal. It also asks participants to report on these types of episodes in a more general standpoint. So an example question would be, generally speaking, when eating, I limit calories. So participants would either answer yes or no. Our next measure is parental teasing around eating and body weight. So this scale contained 15 total items that asked participants to report on their experiences with parental teasing and comments during the ages of 12 to 16 years old. An example item asked the participants to rate their agreement, 1 being never, 5 being always, to statements such as your mother made comments or teased you about your appearance. So here on the scale, higher scores would indicate higher levels of parental teasing, and all our Chromebox alphas were in acceptable range for reliability on this scale. Our next scale is Childhood Family Mealtime Questionnaire. This questionnaire contained 35 items that asked participants to talk about their experiences during meal times as a child. Again, we're asking for ages 12 to 16, and specific questions pertaining to parents' attitudes during mealtime. So an example item would ask their participants to rate their agreement, 1 being never, 5 being always, on statements such as, I felt meal times were warm and sharing time in my family. So here, higher scores indicated a more negative family mealtime experience. And again, our Chromebox alpha was proven to be reliable in this measure. Next, we have Parent Socio-Emotional Context of Feeding Questionnaire. This is a 12-item scale that asks participants to consider scenarios regarding parental attitudes on food and eating, again, from ages 12 to 16 years old. So the scenarios were split up into 2 categories, coercive and support. Participants were asked to rate agreement on these statements, 1 being extremely untrue and 7 being extremely true. An example statement in the coercive section would be, my parents found it difficult to stay calm when I refused to eat certain foods. So for the coercive category, higher scores in this section indicated higher parental coercion. And then in the support category, higher scores indicated higher parental support. And again, our Chromebox alphas proved to be reliable in this measure. And then lastly, we have structure and control in parent feeding. This was a 27-item questionnaire that asked about the amount of control one parents had over their food when participants were again between the ages of 12 and 16. An example question would ask the participants to rate their agreement being 0 being never, 4 being often, on statements such as had rules about when you could have snacks and sweets. Here, higher scores for this scale would indicate higher levels of parental control. And again, our Chromebox alpha was proven to be reliable.
So as for what we found, we first ran bivariate correlations that showed one-to-one relationships between all of our predictors and restrictive eating for 24 hours. You could see here there was a moderate negative correlation between parental control and restrictive eating. So as parental control increased, restrictive eating decreased, which is kind of interesting. Here, when we ran another correlation examining all the predictor variables together, so we took into account the other variables when testing these predictors, we found that mom teasing and dad teasing were both significant, but they went in the opposite direction. So mom teasing had a positive relationship with restrictive eating, while dad teasing had a negative relationship with restrictive eating, which I'll go a little bit more into detail during the discussion portion. So to test our moderators, which are socioeconomic status and parental education level, we also ran bivariate regressions. We found that mom teasing predicts restrictive eating at 24 hours, but it was only significant at low education levels. So this means that people whose parents have a low educational background are the most at risk for developing restrictive eating behaviors if they're also teased by their mother. So we did not find any significance at moderate or high education levels, and we also did not find any significant outcomes for dad teasing. So dad teasing did not predict any restrictive eating behaviors. There are also no moderations for socioeconomic status that we found to be significant. So the present study aimed to determine if there is a significant relationship between family influence and the development of restrictive eating behaviors. We found significant negative relationship between dad teasing and restrictive eating in the past 24 hours, which was from our correlations. So this suggests that the more dad teased, the less restrictive eating behaviors. This might be due to our participants resisting or even rebelling against their fathers for one reason or another. This also might be due to a lack of understanding behind father's intentions while teasing versus the internalization of the participants. So we also found a significant positive relationship between mom teasing and restrictive eating in the past 24 hours, which also was from those correlations. So this suggests that the more mom teased, the more restrictive eating behaviors. And this just kind of shows how females internalize teasing differently from their moms and their dads. And we were also unable to find significant relationships between our other predictors, which were structure and control and mealtime experiences, and our outcome, which was the restrictive eating behaviors when running those correlations that took all of our predictors into account. So when we ran linear regressions between our outcome variable, which was restrictive eating behaviors, and our moderators, this is what we found with mom teasing and restrictive eating. So with mom teasing and restrictive eating, it was only significant at the lowest levels of education. So like I mentioned before, this suggests that people who are most at risk for restrictive eating behaviors are those who have moms who tease them, who are also have lower education levels. And this could be due to other ways in which parents may think about mental health, which can be impacted by education level. So one limitation to our study was our sample. We recruited our participants from Muhlenberg College, which is a PWI, so there is not much variability. Therefore, we were unable to see if our moderators could predict. For the most part, we were unable to see if our moderators could predict any changes among our predictors. We also had a pretty small sample size. If we had a larger sample, even from just Muhlenberg, we would likely see more variability in our participants. And another limitation was asking participants to remember restrictive eating patterns from the past. Memories can be altered when trying to remember experiences from 8 to 10 years ago. So they might just not be entirely accurate, or remembering false memories, or just unable to correctly remember those habits that they used to have. So for future research, we think it would be interesting to look at other influential aspects of a person's environment in addition to parental influence. So there are studies about peers and friends, but not really studies that are super specific about like school and siblings. So we think that would be interesting to look at. We also think that future research should look at an all-male sample because there aren't many studies about restrictive eating in males. And due to our sample, we were unable to look at males and restrictive eating. And we also might want to examine eating behaviors based on geographic location, where someone lives might impact the way they eat and the access they have to food. So thank you for listening to our presentation.